Hey guys, and welcome to episode 259 of the OCDstories.com podcast. Now in this episode I got back on Jon Hershfield. I got Jon back on to talk about the second edition of his book, the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD, and also his upcoming book, the OCD Workbook for Teens. So in this episode we break down both of those books, what they're about, what's in them. We talk about Jon's personal experience with meditation and mindfulness. Why in particular he broke down the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD into themes. We talk about the OCD Workbook for Teens, what it's about, Shinnock's illustrations in the book, the exercises in it, how he works with teens, staying in the present moment, dealing with uncertainty and living joyfully. And we also cover much, much more. This episode is sponsored by OCD Jacksonville and Natural Life. OCD Jacksonville have been big supporters of my work and the podcast over the last few years. I've also had Kim Vincinti on the podcast from OCD Jacksonville. So I'm so happy to have them as a sponsor and to raise awareness about the good work they do. So the next 4 weeks of the OCD Stories podcast will be proudly sponsored by OCD Jacksonville, an affiliate of the International OCD Foundation and Natural Life. OCD Jacksonville have teamed up with Natural Life to create an apparel and gift range called Fearless. A portion of the proceeds goes back to fund the good work OCD Jacksonville are doing. Shop the Natural Life Fearless range collection at naturallife.com. Listeners of the show can use the promo code FEARLESS at checkout to receive a 20% off discount. Fearless, face everything and rise, a movement to educate, empower and reduce the stigma of anxiety disorders. Visit ocdjacksonville.com or naturallife.com for more information, or click the link in the episode description to go straight to the products. So thank you to OCD Jacksonville and Natural Life for supporting the show, and to you guys for listening as always. I deeply appreciate it. And without further ado, here is Jon Hershfield. On the podcast today, I have Jon Hershfield. Jon is a psychotherapist and the director of the Center for OCD and Anxiety at Sheppard Pratt. He is the author of 6 OCD books, including his most recent book, the second edition of the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD, and his upcoming book, the OCD Workbook for Teens. Welcome back to the show, Jon.
Hi, Stu. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. And I think last time, correct me if I'm wrong, I got you on was to do a COVID episode around moral scrupulosity. So it's good to have you on. That was obviously when it all kicked off back in March, April time.
Yeah. I was thinking about the game changers. They had the final thoughts on COVID at the end of the year, and
yeah.
I wish they were final thoughts. It's amazing that we're still dealing with this. It's really frustrating.
Of course, yeah. Well, that event in March was a week later in the UK. Anyway, we went into the first lockdown, so it's amazing how quickly it seemed to change.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to have you again. And so I guess since that time, what's new with you? Is there anything you want to share other than 2 books we're going to talk about?
Yeah, well, there's been quite a few changes, actually. So I was running a private practice, and now I'm working for Sheppard Pratt, which is a well-known institution out here in mental health and social services. And so I'm mostly doing the same thing in terms of working at the outpatient level, seeing a lot of clients, and I have this great team of clinicians who are specialists in OCD, and we're helping a lot of people. But now I'm also working with a residential program called The Retreat at Sheppard Pratt, where they help people with really complex cases. So my hope and my plan this year is to try to build in some OCD services, so people. One of the challenges with people with really severe OCD is, you live with really severe OCD for a long time. You also tend to have some other things going on, and whether that's depression or personality disorders or substance abuse or things like that. And it becomes very easy to get ruled out. We can't treat you here because of this, and we can't treat you there because of that. So my hope is to be involved in creating an environment for the hardest OCD cases where we don't have to say no. So we'll see if I can pull it off. I have a lot of really great people working with me. So
yeah, well, that's a very noble ambition, and I'm sure you'll achieve it.
Well, thank you.
No worries. Okay, so let's get into the 2 books. We'll touch on the second edition of the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD. So that book, when was the first one published?
In 2013.
Oh, wow. I thought it was older than that. Okay. So, yes, it's been a while anyway. And I know it's been quite successful. And I'm sure many people listening to this have at least heard of it, if not read it. So we'll just, well, yeah. So, firstly, I guess what's the book about for anyone who isn't familiar with it? And then kind of second part to that question is what's new with this edition?
Yeah, well, it feels a bit older because was it December 2013 is when it came out, and then the second edition came out December 2020. But you have to remember that 2020 was actually 7 years long, so so that's why it feels that way. The Mindfulness Workbook for OCD is a self-help manual that basically breaks down what OCD is and what the best evidence-based treatments for it are. But it takes a look at all of those, and then it asks the question, well, how does mindfulness apply here? So it's not about, use mindfulness to cure your OCD. It's use ERP and CBT and everything we know that works, but understand it from a perspective of mindfulness and how having that perspective may actually allow these tools to be even more effective for you. And the bulk of the book is really just chapters devoted to each of the themes that tend to come up in OCD and how you would use cognitive reframing, how you would use ERP, how you would think about being mindful of these types of thoughts or these types of experiences. What's different in the second edition is, I'm a much older man now, and so I've learned a lot more about mindfulness since the first edition, and have thought a lot more about it and had a lot more experience just meditating and learning about mindfulness. So a lot of that gets in the book. I hope I do a better job of explaining what I'm talking about. Also, there have been some changes in how we think about ERP and how to approach it and why it works. And they're not actually, there's some controversy is not the right word for it, but there's some disagreement here and there about habituation versus inhibitory learning versus this versus that, and a lot of people, when they look at these new terms that come up, they have the experience of, oh, okay, I'll call it that, because it's a lot of what we've been doing without maybe not having the right words for it. And inhibitory learning is a good example of that. So I talk a lot about how inhibitory learning applies to OCD, and I think a lot of OCD therapists who are thinking about that term and thinking about, oh, this isn't different, it's because it kind of makes sense. Sure, habituation is important. We want people to feel less distress, less anxiety, less disgust, but it's also important to generalize. It's also important to learn how to live in a world where there's triggers abound, and you want to be able to navigate them. So how do we do that? Well, we don't just do one kind of exposure over and over and over again. We do many different kinds of exposures in different contexts in different ways. So your brain gets a sense of, I'm able to experience this here as well as over here, as well as over here. This is a little bit different, but it's kind of the same thing, and I can experience it. So I tried to tap into some of that in the second edition. I think it adds a little bit more texture to the central thesis, which is, you're not defective. You can learn to master your OCD, and it's going to involve standing up to your fears in creative ways.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I'm glad you included inhibitory learning. I think it's worth talking about. There's nothing wrong with habituation, as you say, but it's not perfect. What was I going to say? Before I go into my next question, actually, because the book is primarily based, obviously you talk about CBT, ERP, but mindfulness is kind of the lens in which you're viewing this. You're a big meditator yourself, as you alluded to there. You've done several sort of retreats and stuff, like 3-day, and I'm sure you've done longer than that. But I guess, is there anything you want to add personally from your experience of, like, I don't say taming your own mind, but creating a new relationship with thoughts through meditation?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was one of the more challenging things among the many challenging things of living through this pandemic, has been not being able to go on a retreat at all. I didn't know anything about it. I always thought it was kind of a goofy idea until I did it. And then once I did it, it's a bit frustrating because it doesn't happen for everyone, but I guess I was just lucky. But you have some of these experiences where the clouds sort of break open and you feel like you can see things for what they really are. And if you can remember that, it really helps in regular life when you're not on retreat. The longer you go without doing it, knowing that there's this experience that you could be having, it becomes more and more frustrating. So it's nice to go back every once in a while. And not being able to do that. I went on a 2-day retreat in January of 2020. And yeah, I'm really kind of craving it again. I think the big lesson learned is it's hard to put into words. We could say thoughts are thoughts and feelings are feelings and sensations are sensations. And they're all just experiences. They're just, the page turns and this is the next thing on the page. You didn't write the page. You don't know what's going to happen next. Right? You don't know what thought you're going to have next. I don't know what feeling is going to come up next. And when it does, I'll experience it in that moment, hopefully without a lot of judgment. And that sounds good, but when you actually experience it, it's a much different thing to really be able to see the difference between an experience and a story. We spend much of our lives in stories. Especially with OCD. I'm a bad person, I'm a monster, I'm dirty, this is dangerous, I'm going to make a mistake. These are stories in our heads. It's not the same thing as what it feels like to have the weight of the body pushing down in the chair, right? Or what the experience is like to notice the beginning of a thought and also the end of a thought, or the beginning of a breath and the end of a breath. That's like raw data, which is different from a story. And again, I try to articulate this in the book, I think better than I can do right now. I think people get confused when they think about mindfulness. They tend to think about, watching your thoughts come and go. And that's a thing that does happen in some forms of meditation, but that's not really what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is really a perspective. It's not a thing you do. It's an ability to recognize when you're lost in thought and drop out of that into the present moment experience. So when you think about what the challenge often is with OCD, where we get swept up in these stories and your OCD tells you that this terrible thing's going to happen or has happened and you have to do these compulsions or else it's the end of the world. And you're just trying to keep up. You're just trying to keep from being annihilated. And then to remember, okay, I'm trying to find certainty here. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm lost in a story. And to just imagine just falling out of that as if you were up in a cloud and then you suddenly fell back down to earth. That's what mindfulness is. It's not just sitting there and suffering and waiting for the suffering to end and then now it's over and okay, I was mindful. No, it's actually kind of the opposite of that. It's sort of recognizing when you're suffering and you don't have to and letting go of that.
Yeah, good image, good visual image. No, thank you for sharing that. That was great. And the next question that comes to mind is, this is more, I guess, for the first edition of originally when you were writing it. Why go down the route of individual themes as opposed to like, here's my view and Tom's view on, Tom's obviously the co-author on it, on I guess, I'm not critiquing you here. I'm just curious of why, because not many OCD books do that. They don't break down by theme. You've explicitly got chapters per theme.
Yeah, it's a bit playing with fire because I absolutely see the argument of, why people don't want to talk about subtypes because, an obsession is an obsession and a compulsion is a compulsion. We don't need, it is a problem that sometimes people say like, oh, I have, POCD or I have ROCD and they talk about it like it's a diagnosis, like it's, that it's a different type of mental health challenge. And obviously that's not true. On the other hand, finding people that you can relate to and forming community and being able to understand like, oh, this is something you struggle with. This is something I struggle with as well. I think one of the hardest things about living with OCD is you feel alone. You think you're the one, right? You're the one with the problem. And, it's easy to forget that, you're the one of, some millions of people with that problem. And, people get stuck on things. Sometimes people get stuck on this thing. Sometimes people get stuck on some other thing. So I think the focus on different themes, and if you read the book, you'll see that the recommendations are essentially the same, but it really has to do with making the reader feel heard. I mean, some of the best feedback that I've gotten about this book is that I didn't understand that I had OCD until I saw that there was a chapter about this particular kind of thinking that I just thought was me being crazy. And it turns out like, no, it's actually, just like any other kind of OCD. Some people wash their hands, and I've been washing my mind of of the sexual identity I'm afraid I have, but no, I don't, right? It's the same process, and being able to see that, oh, and actually now that I'm talking it out, I think the advantage of having a chapter for as many themes as I could fit into the word count is that it actually reveals that they are all the same thing. And if I hadn't gone through each theme, somebody would read the book and say like, yeah, that's what OCD is, but mine's different because, they didn't mention religious fears or existential fears. So, if it was up to me, the book would be twice as long, and anything I could think of that you could obsess about, I would give it its own chapter so that somebody out there felt heard.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining. Yeah, you do have a lot of themes in there, but yeah, you're right. There's a million different types of themes if we were to break it down. But yeah, I see that. I think also sometimes applying, because it's very exercise heavy, which is great. But yeah, like you said, someone would read that if it was generic and be like, yeah, but this isn't applicable to my theme. And here you've kind of said, well, actually it is, and this is how, and here's, I've tailored the instructions for your specific theme. And so yeah, anyone who's interested, definitely go check that out.
That's a symptom, right? That's part of the OCD is thinking that, that if your theme wasn't explicitly mentioned, then it's not OCD. That's a big part of OCD, is fearing that it isn't OCD and having a reason why it might not be OCD. There's a way that the disorder creates this sense of otherness, which is another reason why mindfulness is especially helpful, because if you actually start to connect with mindfulness concepts, you lose a lot of that otherness. There is this concept of a kind of collective, this is what it's like to be a person. You lose that attachment to your labels and your identities, and I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there anything in the book, like someone buy it, I'm sure on Amazon or wherever people want to buy it, you've listed kind of the themes in there, but let's say they buy the book without seeing the themes, and then they're going through it, there's not a chapter on my theme or the theme that was most important to me. Is there anything you've written in there to stop them kind of spiraling of, oh no, if Jon doesn't consider this a key theme, then it's not?
Yeah. Well, again, we don't diagnose OCD based on what the theme is. It's not based on the content of the thought. It's based on the process with which you relate to it. And I do try to make that explicit in the book. I mean, I think I have a paragraph in there that's a disclaimer that's like, here's a list of some things I didn't mention and also some things I can't think of right now. And it's really the publisher's fault for not having an unlimited supply of paper to print. They're doing the best they can. I was able to squeeze a few more themes into the second edition than in the first, but also at the sacrifice of some things from the first that I had to cut out to make room for. So I'd never written a second edition before, so it's kind of interesting. It's like doing a remix of an electronic song you made a decade ago.
Yeah. Well, you do music, right? So.
Well, I haven't in a decade, but I used to make electronic music, so that's the that's why that thought popped in my head.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the OCD Workbook for Teens. Yeah, I guess just tell us about that book.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to write this. I mean, the title says it all. I mean, I was asked by the publisher, hey, can you write an OCD book for teens? There are some excellent OCD workbooks for teens out there, and I didn't want to just copy what was done, and so I sat for a while and just thought about, okay, I remember being a teenager with OCD. What would have been useful? And I thought a lot about my teen clients, and there's things you say to teen clients where they totally get it, and they're like, oh, I feel understood, and you feel like, oh, right, I made that connection, I made that alliance. And then there's other things you say to teen clients, and you just see their eyes glaze over, and they're like, oh, this guy,
Yeah.
And I didn't want that to be the experience. Nobody that early in life wants to read a self-help book. It's enough of a challenge to read any book in this day and age. They don't want to read a self-help book reminding them that something is wrong with them. So I really thought about that, and well, what would they want to read? And I just tried to keep reminding myself of that as I was writing. It's actually very similar to the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD. I mean, it's not like I have a chapter for every theme or in that way, but it breaks down the same basic concepts, but it puts it into a language that I hope would make sense to a teen, and in a context that I think is relevant to what teens are going through in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean Shinnock he drew the illustrations. Just anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, that was just luck. I mean, I met him at an OCD conference, and we just started chatting, and I had just started to, maybe I'd written a couple of chapters. I was just started to work on writing the book, and I thought, you need something besides me just going on and on about OCD, and here's what you should do, and and then I saw his artwork, and I just thought, wow, this is amazing. So it just kind of developed organically from there. And so what we did was, I essentially wrote the book, the first draft of the book, and then he and I went through the book together, chapter by chapter, and talked about, okay, what is the point of this chapter? What am I trying to get across? What's the tagline here? And it might be something like self-compassion is an important tool. It's a strength-based tool. That might be one of the ideas. Or if we're talking about cognitive distortions, there are ways to challenge the way you're thinking about your process without self-reassuring. That's the idea I'm trying to get across. All right, so how could we portray that visually? So we came up with this idea of, there's a hero character that's like different in each picture, and then there's an OCD character that's kind of a monstrous thing that's different in each picture. And it was just amazing because, as you know, and as everybody knows about me, I'm a words guy. I use a lot of words, and Sean is obviously a visual guy, and we were able to kind of find a common language. And he would just produce these amazing pictures. And I was like, yes, that picture says what this chapter says. So I hope the readers have that experience. And they're also just very cool pictures. They're a little bit dark and sinister, a little bit comedic. They're not just like, kid drawings, like, this will make you happy. They'll make you think. There's a lot to look at in them.
Yeah, I agree. He did a great job. Obviously, you guys teamed up well, and there's a lot of detail in the images that you don't often get in books, in sort of self-help books. If there's images, they're usually quite generic or plain, and he's gone into incredible detail. You can spend a while looking at it and just noticing things. So yeah, I think, and for teens, it's going to be great for them to kind of have that and not just have text. Like you said, when I was a teen, I think I read one book until I was about 16. So yeah. Okay, so I guess, are there any kind of the exercises in the book that you could share, just top line?
Trying to think off the top of my head. I don't have a copy of it in front of me. I know in the beginning of the book, I mean, I really tried to make this a book that gets out in front of this issue of, okay, you have a diagnosis and you have a disorder. So before I go into like, here's how you treat OCD, there's a lot in the book that's about like, hey, guess what? this is here's the deal, is really the tone. I think the title of the first chapter is who's super jazzed about having a mental health issue? And so one of the exercises in there is I have them think about people that they know in their lives who have a diagnosis of anything, right? A doctor has said, you have this thing. I mean, it could be a medical issue or a psychiatric issue. and to write out, what you think of this person with the diagnosis, to kind of realize, well, when you think of this other person with their diagnosis, you don't think of them as being, broken or weird or stupid or whatever it is. Well, okay, well, you have a diagnosis and you're not broken and weird and stupid. You just got a challenge, and thankfully you have a challenge that we have a treatment for and you can develop some mastery over. So I try to walk that line of being serious about kind of the heaviness and the darkness that comes with OCD, but without losing the sense of hopefulness. Because I think a lot of teens who discover they have OCD, they're not like, oh, this explains everything. They're more like, oh, that explains everything, and it's not a good thing. It's viewed as great, now I'm doomed for however many years I'm supposed to walk the earth with this problem. Yeah. And obviously that's not true, right? Yeah. It's people do develop mastery over this disorder. They just need the right information and that sense of ability, that sense of hope.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So most of the exercises are written that way, of kind of like, let's think through this problem together. But
kind of like shifting thinking.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Yeah, I like that. And yeah, early intervention is important. So I think it's great that, hopefully this book will resonate with them, which I'm sure it will. Okay, so the next question is more of a generic one, actually, for you, just generally as a clinician. Is how do you personally tailor your approach to treating adolescents or teens versus, say, adults? Is it just in the way you phrase things, or is it more than that?
I mean, in writing the book, I think I certainly took a more sarcastic's not the right word because it has a negative connotation, but there's a tone to the book where it's like, yeah, I know, everything's kind of insane, kind of
more
absurd.
Playful.
Yeah, more playful tone. And in a sense, I'm kind of asking the reader to just, give me a shot. Like, I know I'm an old man and I'm all my references are dated, but just hear me out, maybe we'll find some common ground. And I think I do that with a lot of my younger clients. I can talk video games. I can talk, some types of music. I can talk scary movies. And so I certainly spend a certain amount of time on alliance building. And there's a lot of aspects of my personality that for whatever reason just stopped growing around 16 or 17. So I can connect at that level. So I'm not sure that it is significantly different for when I'm treating adults. I think you have to be really careful not to talk down to teens, but also not underestimate the reality that a lot of what they're going through is really new to them. And they're just starting to experiment with being jaded and cynical. They haven't quite locked into that yet. And so if you can get in there early enough and access their sense of humor and their sense of hopefulness and their sense of childlike play without it seeming lame, then I think you have a better shot of connecting.
Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. So on the front cover of the book, there's 3 key points. I won't list them out straight away, but I'll ask these, and so I'm going to ask them as questions to you now. I guess not just for any teens that may be listening or parents of teens, but just for generally anyone listening. So the first point is about staying in the present moment. So my very generic and vague question is, how do you stay in the present moment?
By trying really, really hard. Staying in the present moment. Well, it's really what I was talking about before. It's being able to tell the difference between a story and an experience. In the present, there's only ever 6 things going on: your 5 senses and your thoughts. So you're sitting here and you're looking at a screen, and what's coming up in the screen? A sensation in my body, a sound. And you want to relate to all of these things that are showing up in the same way from the present moment. It's actually a really neat experiment to run. I do this sometimes when I'm running a group. I'll ask people just listen for a couple of seconds And they'll say, well, what did you hear? Sound of the air conditioner or a car driving by or something like that. And I'll say, well, did you choose to hear that sound? Well, no, of course not. Okay. When the sound went away, did you make the sound go away? No, of course not. Yeah, cool. So like thoughts are just like that. Thoughts are they're just showing up, and you're either noticing it and paying attention to it, or you're not noticing it and not paying attention to it. But you're not involved in the creation, the formation, the bringing up, or the putting down. Your control comes in the form of how much and what kind of attention that you're paying. So being in the present moment is really just asking, what are you devoting your attention to? Are you devoting it to trying to figure out if your OCD thought is true or not true, or if you're a good or bad person? Or is your attention devoted to just what's right in front of you, what you're doing right there in that moment, why you're there in that moment to do that thing?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, good points. So the next point on the front cover is, I can't remember how it's written, but to deal with uncertainty. So my question is, how do you deal with uncertainty?
You're really throwing the hardball questions at me today.
Yeah.
How do you deal with uncertainty? The central thing to understand about uncertainty is that it's not different from any other aspect of your experience. It's always there, right? We generally confuse confidence with certainty, right? And that's good enough. It's fine, right? I could say I'm absolutely certain that I'm having this conversation with the great Stuart Ralph of OCD Stories on my computer right now. That's definitely true. That's my experience. If I'm going to be, really detailed about it, though, I can't be certain. Maybe this is a dream, or maybe whatever. Maybe I'm confused.
Have a twin,
somehow.
or
yeah. That's an interesting idea too. Yeah. Maybe there's a twin.
I wish I did. Half my workload.
Yes, I could use a clone myself. So, and this isn't meant to be just some sort of mind game, like, maybe we're all in the Matrix. But what I'm really saying is, okay, with that sort of extreme example, there's no point debating, am I certain, am I not certain? You just, what is what is. Yeah. But with OCD, it tends to take a lot of things that seem obvious to other people and seemed obvious to you before it became an obsession, and suddenly it doesn't seem so obvious. I thought I was one kind of person. I had a thought, and then suddenly I wondered, am I really that kind of person? This is especially true with things like moral scrupulosity. People start to really wonder, well, I just assumed I was a good person, and suddenly it occurred to me maybe I wasn't, and now I can't stop thinking about all these ways in which I might not be a good person. So remembering that really the difference between somebody without OCD and with OCD when it comes to uncertainty is the willingness to give up that project of getting certain. So somebody without OCD might have a thought like, well, what if this thing gets me sick, or what if a child gets harmed in the process of me doing something? And they'll think about it, and they'll think through all the ways in which they can try to, be certain, and they'll say, okay, well, that's close enough. And then they'll just stop, right? I'll say, well, that's good. I've done enough to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And then they move on. And someone with OCD is much more likely to say, no, there's more I could do. And then they will try to do that. And that's where compulsive behavior really comes in. It's the attempts that go above and beyond our typical safety behaviors, like wearing a seatbelt, our typical spiritual behaviors like praying. It's the above and beyond part that makes it compulsive. And that's really grounded in this idea that I could stop now and just accept that it's probably okay, but probably is not good enough. I'm going to keep going. So I don't know if that answers the question of how to deal with uncertainty, but it does answer the question of, do I have to deal with uncertainty? And that answer is yes.
Nice. No, it does. Yeah, and I like what you said about it's not necessarily the action, it's going beyond that. That's where the disorder lies. Okay, so the last point on the front cover of the book, if I can speak, is I think something like how to live joyfully. So yeah, I guess the question to you is, how do you live joyfully?
Well, let me just say, I didn't write those.
Oh, right.
There's some very smart
The
person in the
editor.
marketing department that put that on there, I'm sure. But I mean, but that is true, that's part of the central thesis of the book, that
Mm.
having a mental health condition is not doesn't mean you have to be unhappy all the time. Having a challenge doesn't mean that you have to feel less than all the time.
Mm.
You have as much right to and access to a joyful experience of life as anybody else, if you understand certain things about how the mind works and how OCD works. I mean, it's even true with exposure therapy. Like, it's a bad rap for being like really mean and torturous, and you're supposed to hate it, and all this stuff. You're supposed to like, oh, I can't wait for it to be over. I just got to do it because it's my therapy. That stuff doesn't really work in the long run. You can even do ERP and be joyful if you're thinking about it in the right way. It doesn't mean it won't be hard.
Yeah.
But if you've ever exercised really hard, you could even be joyful while also thinking, oh, I can't breathe, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a certain joy in having that choice. That I'm choosing to be here. I'm choosing to take a stand. I'm choosing to move forward in my life. That can be a joyful experience.
Yeah, what came to me as you said that in relation to exercise and an ERP is also like the word mastery. So like I always see ERP as a way of like gaining mastery in life, whether that's over yourself or circumstances. And there's a lot that can be gained from that in terms of like, I'll say self-esteem, but things along those lines. Because you're showing your brain of, well, look what I did. I did what I thought was impossible or that was scary to me. And I faced those problems and overcame it. I think that's similar to exercise for me personally, exercising, I mean, I need to get back on it, but historically it's always been, you feel good about yourself and you feel like you're overcoming limitations, I guess.
Well, I really like the way you put it as showing your brain, because I do think that that's what ERP is about. It's about demonstrating something to your brain so that it can recalculate its position on what's bothering you. I say this a lot. Your brain doesn't know that you have OCD. It doesn't work that way. It can't have that kind of knowledge. It's always going to assume that what you're doing for a good reason. If you avoid something, your brain's going to be like, yeah, good choice. That probably would have been bad if you didn't avoid it. You ask for reassurance, your brain's going to say, oh yeah, sure. You have no idea. Good thing you got that reassurance. It's always on your side, no matter what you do. I mean, we always often think of our brain as kind of being our enemy, but it's really just following our instructions. And when we do exposure therapy, the exposure part is putting yourself in situations where you feel that urge to do compulsions. You feel that urge to strive for certainty and try to tackle it. And when you give in to that urge, your brain goes, oh, good thing you did that, because we couldn't have handled a second more. That would have destroyed us. And of course, next time you're in that situation, your brain says, oh, you better do your compulsion, because we can't handle this. When you don't do the compulsion, and either the anxiety or distress goes down, or you learn to kind of bring in the anxiety and distress in a way that makes sense for you, that you're like, okay, this is unpleasant, but I kind of accept that. I can embrace that. I can understand that as part of the bigger picture. I don't need to run from this. Inhibitory learning would say, you're inhibited from running away from it. And then you're showing your brain what you can do, right? So next time you approach that, your brain's gonna be like, oh, this is that scary thing that you can handle, right? It's a very kind of confusing middle ground there. And after a while, through repetition, you start to develop that confidence. And your brain says, oh, we got this. Even if it's something that consistently scares you, like it could be like horror movies or roller coasters or something like that. Your brain's like, hey, yeah, we can be scared here. That's allowed, right? Because we've shown the brain what we can do. That's really the problem of compulsions, is it robs the brain of the opportunity to learn how to deal with some of this scary stuff that we have to deal with in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, and if I can handle this, what else could I handle in life that I underestimated about myself? Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that's all the bullet points that the marketers put on the front.
Yeah, well, you guys did a good job out there. Well,
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So can people? Is it pre-order now? Or is it not on
yeah,
pre-order? It is. Okay.
yeah. The Mindfulness Workbook's been out since December. The
Yes.
Team
Yeah.
Workbook comes out, I think, in March. But yeah, you can absolutely pre-order.
Cool. All right. So I'll put. I mean, people can Google it, but I'll put a link in the show notes to both those books. Um. Okay. So. Yeah. Okay. So I remember in one of our interviews, it was one of the more recent ones. You said that you needed to stop writing or wanted to stop writing for a bit. It may not have been in one of the interviews. It may have just been a conversation we had. So I just wanted to see if your views changed on that, or whether you're still happy to keep writing.
I mean,
You're going to say you don't
I
remember now.
well, I mean, you and my wife have heard a lot of me complaining about it's a lot. It's a lot to write, and I don't want to keep repeating myself. And I'm really grateful to have been given the opportunity to write things, that are published that people can access. And so I certainly don't want to appear to lack any gratitude for that. But in addition to everything else I'm doing, it's a lot of work. On the other hand, I kind of feel like Al Pacino in the Godfather series. I kind of get pulled back into these discussions of like, oh yeah, I think maybe I'm going to have to go back in and write a book about this. So I don't have anything, currently happening where it's like, yeah, this book's definitely happening. But I have a couple of conversations happening with some friends about, what would be great is a book about OCD and this, or a book about OCD and that. And I'd like to write them, but we'll have to see what happens. In the meantime, I obviously have plenty of work to do with all the things I was telling you at the beginning of the show.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to ask that question. And yeah, there's obviously no pressure. Hopefully there's no external pressure for you to write, but I know a lot of people are grateful for your writing. So yeah, if you never write another thing, thank you for writing what you've written.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I won't say I'm not retiring or from writing. But
no, yeah, all right, yeah.
Maybe I should just take a year or two off. Is all I'm thinking.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, so right, billboard. You got a billboard. What do you want written on it?
So I was thinking about this today, and what did I decide would be good? It was look to what's good now. I don't know why I like that. This is like a weird fragment of a sentence. Look to what's good now. It's a good reminder, especially during COVID and with, politics being the way they are. And there's just so much easy access to what's bad and what's changed and what's depressing and what's hard to stay hopeful for. And that can end up being a huge distraction from the things that haven't changed, that are still good, that are still really awesome. Your favorite music, your favorite food, the people that you have close by that you love, your good relationships, and the simple things. I mean, it sounds trite, but like a sunset, but the sunset hasn't changed. It's not any less beautiful just because we're all living through this collective trauma. So look for it. We had to do this over the holidays. Everybody, a lot of people were celebrating their holidays, without many of the people they love, without their parties and things like that. Okay, but you still had access to festive music. You still had access to decorations. You still had access to the movies that you would always watch around the holidays and things like that. They're still good. And that's part of being in the present moment is look at what's there, not just what you don't want to be there. And a lot of times we get so distracted by what we don't want to be there that we think that the good things aren't there. And we're really just not even looking at them or looking for them.
Yeah. Yeah, love that. Lastly then, is there anything else that you wish you could have shared?
Well, I won't know until we hang up, but I guarantee it.
Good.
Yeah. But I always enjoy our conversations too. And I want to, just again, thank you for everything you do for the OCD community. In the same way that I hope people see themselves in my books. I know they see themselves in many of the discussions that you have with people, and it makes a difference. It really matters. Thank you.
No, that means a lot. Thank you very much. And yeah, great to have you on once again. And yeah, people do check out Jon's books if you're interested. Links in the show notes. And until next time, take care, Jon.
Bye.
So there you have it. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. Thank you to Jon for his time. And don't forget, today's episode is sponsored by OCD Jacksonville and Natural Life. And to check out the Natural Life Fearless collection, head over to naturallife.com or ocdjacksonville.com, or click the link in the episode description to go straight to the range. And don't forget to use promo code FEARLESS to get 20% off. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It's not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.